My name is Tessa Veksler, and I am a second-year student at the University of California, Santa Barbara. After taking a gap year in Israel, I've been honored to come onto the team of ICC Fellows and even on the National Council of Fellows in order to continue my journey and passion for Israel advocacy. My Jewish identity has emboldened me and allowed me to take steps in my academic and personal goals that I never thought were possible. I'm very excited to introduce someone who has impressively utilized Jewish principles and wisdom to guide her in a life of purpose and meaning. I'm honored to welcome Michal Oshman, who is joining us today. Michal Oshman is head of company culture, diversity and inclusion, and employer branding at TikTok Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, and was formerly responsible for international leadership and team development at Facebook. Throughout her career, she has trained and coached hundreds of tech leaders. She has 3 university degrees in psychodynamic and systemic thinking, sociology, and anthropology. Michal lives with her husband and her 4 children in the London, UK, and she recently published her book, What Would You Do If You Weren't Afraid?, where she offers solutions to your everyday struggles. She empowers you as well as teaches you how to adopt her self-development tools to discover who you really are and what you were born to do with your life. With its uplifting belief that you already have all the ingredients within you to lead a joyous life, Michal's unique mix of corporate culture experience and Jewish wisdom will help you reconnect with yourself. Michal, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Tessa, and thank you for this warm welcome. I feel like the bar is high now. I have to stand up to all those definitions that you made, but thank you for the kind introduction.
Of course, thank you so much for being here. So I'd like to welcome you to tell us a little bit about where you started and where you are today and how this journey led you to write your first book.
So I'm going to go like in the deep end, right? I'm just going to open up really fast, I guess, because we have less than 1 hour. And this session was really designed for the audience. So whatever I say, hopefully by listening to you and to me, Tessa, people will get something out of it, something practical. And just to say, I'm sorry about my voice. I've been talking a lot, I guess, but hopefully I'm saying meaningful things. So a little bit about me. I was, this accent that I have is an Israeli accent. I grew up in Israel in the 70s, and I grew up to Holocaust survivor family. And my grandparents from both sides were survivors, but I lived side by side, or actually together with my grandparents from my mother's side. And my grandmother, Hannah, jumped actually off the train on the way to Auschwitz. She, of course, didn't know exactly where they were going, but something very wrong, it felt to her like something very bad was going to happen. And she was brave, but also lucky to be able to jump off the train. She jumped off the train. She hurt herself. She was shot at. She had to hide in a barn for weeks. She was emotionally and physically hurt, but she survived. And she arrived to Israel, met my grandfather. They raised a family. And my whole childhood, my grandmother felt that she had to prepare me for the next bad thing that is going to happen. And as a child, my first memories include hiding tuna cans underneath my bed and baby formula. I was the first granddaughter. So I grew up to a lot of pain, a lot of sadness. My first memories are hearing my grandmother screaming at night, afraid that the Nazi are going to take me. So that was my Tel Aviv experience. I know often people think Tel Aviv, it's the beach and beautiful food and beautiful people, but I grew up to sadness and to fear. Another part of my upbringing was my father's profession. He was the head forensic pathologist of Israel for many years. And for different reasons that I share in the book, I saw death. I saw terror. I was deeply afraid. And every single day I thought was my last day or my family's last day. But I wanted to please my family and to please my grandparents and make all of that they've been through worth it. So I tried to be perfect. I tried to be the perfect daughter and the perfect granddaughter and the perfect student. And then later on, I tried to be the perfect officer in the army. I served in the IDF for 3 years, but inside I had a lot of fear, and but I covered up. So all those things that you read about, let's say, my resume on my LinkedIn, they're true, but as those things were happening inside, I was miserable. But I carried on and I was always highly functional. And I guess I pretended that everything's okay. I went through teenage army, as I said, and then I did these degrees. I even got married and had 3 children, and now I have 4. And at a certain stage, after going to therapy for many, many years and taking medication, I couldn't find a way to help myself. I had all those things to celebrate, really beautiful things, but inside I couldn't, I didn't, I couldn't hear, I couldn't see the sun. I couldn't hear the birds. I was really afraid until I made a discovery. Actually, when I joined Facebook around that time, I made the discovery that I share about in the book. And once I made the discovery, and the discovery is the beautiful ideas and the Jewish wisdom, then that was a life-changing discovery. And I'm hoping to share some of the ideas with you today.
Thank you for sharing your story. And I love, this idea that you drive through in your book is finding purpose and meaning. And for college students like me, the last few years have been very difficult. And most of us have had to deal with taking classes online and being isolated from our peers. And I think some of us have struggled within this environment to continue staying motivated and feeling like our lives have purpose. And several places in your book about purpose really, really resonated with me when thinking about this time. So I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you find meaning through serving others and through finding your strengths.
So thank you for asking me this because I care deeply about this. So the bottom line is that searching for your purpose, and if we're really lucky, finding it is really, really good for mental health and well-being. I'm not saying that it's the cure for everything, and you'll never hear me saying that one thing is the cure for everything because I do prefer looking at things holistically. But I do believe that searching for meaning um, gets us, or at least helped me get less obsessed about myself, my looks, my success, my this, my, anything, and channeling all that energy towards something more meaningful, more purposeful, and often targeted towards, as you said, serving someone else was, really helped me. That's why in the book I say that volunteering, I call it vitamin V. It's a vitamin to volunteer, right? Like nothing bad can happen if you take it. You'll immediately feel better once you do something for either a cause or a purpose or someone else. One of the most effective places, I think, to read about the importance of looking for meaning is Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if you didn't get a chance, anyone watching and listening, to read this small but mighty book, I recommend it, even though it's not an easy read. And Viktor Frankl very quickly was a doctor. He was a neurologist and a psychiatrist. He was a student of Sigmund Freud, and before the Holocaust, before the Second World War. And it sounds crazy to say this, but he conducted like a big part of his research in Auschwitz and in other camps. And even though he was in the most horrendous of situations one can dream of, he was very curious to understand what increases an individual's chance to continue wanting to live, right? Because there were the electric gates, people could run towards the end. And why would you want to continue a life like that? Is that even a life within Auschwitz? And what he discovered is that the people that had a greater chance, and of course, people couldn't control their destiny, but a greater chance to want to continue with life were the people that found meaning in Auschwitz, in the camps, in the whole situation of the Holocaust. And meaning and purpose in that setting meant wanting to reconnect with a family member after and hoping that there will be an after, or supporting with a conversation with someone that's having a really, when we say bad day today, of course, a bad day in Auschwitz is nothing that we can imagine today. Or just wanting to survive, to write about this so future generations will know about what happened. And those people wanted to live more and found their inner resilience. So I truly believe that even in difficult situations, and no one wants to go through difficult times in life, but even in difficult situations, what's really helpful is to try to understand what is meaningful to me? What's my role here? What can I do in this situation, even if this is not what I wanted? And I know that students experience this on campus. I know I experienced this in my life. life happens. And one of the beautiful ideas I love in Chassidut, in spiritual Judaism, is the idea of the day you were born was the day that the world was missing you. And every single day, the world continued to miss you, right? You, Tessa, me, my children. And I had no idea that I was born for a reason. I thought I was born because something happened 9 months before, which is also the case. But this notion that we're here for a reason and nothing happens by chance, and we have a role to play, right? And those roles change, right? You have a role to play where you are in your life at the moment. I have a role to play where I am at my life in my mid 40s, and these things are dynamic. But looking for what is my role now in the world is really important, I think. And I'm actually curious to ask you, if I may, and if it's not okay, then stop me. Um, and you mentioned these last couple of years, and I assume you meant COVID and Israel-Gaza conflict, and many things that happened in the last 2 years, many of them not that pleasant. How did you stay anchored, and was it through purpose?
Yeah, and I also read Viktor Frankl's book recently, and I also kind of got the same message as you from it. But the one quote that stuck out for me in your book was replacing fear with action. Because I think during COVID, uncertainty is something that we're really, really afraid of. And at the beginning of COVID, I was running a campaign called Hands Against Anti-Semitism, which was completely, flipped around when COVID started, and I had to switch completely to online. And then I was put in a position where I had to decide what I was going to do for my first year of college, and that's when I made my decision to move to Israel for a year. And kind of it's one of those things again, like you're afraid, but you had to just act upon it and make that decision. And it turned out being the most significant year and most meaningful year that I've, lived in my life so far. And when I came back to UCSB, I had this new fire lit under me despite all of these circumstances. And I've become involved in all these different things. But I think that I wouldn't have been able to do that without the mindset of you have to sometimes just act upon opportunities despite the fear that you might be facing. And that's what gives you purpose and gives you meaning. So I love that. And there was another motto that I wanted to ask you about in your book. So you mentioned in your book that your time at Facebook, you came across the motto "fail harder." And this particularly stuck out to me because as college students, we're already under a lot of pressure. And as pro-Israel students, we fear failing in the sense that we feel like our efforts in our activism won't be successful and that we may be negatively affected by the things that we say. So how do you encourage people to not be afraid of failure and making a mistake?
Mm, well, that's a big question. So first of all, I want to normalize this fear of failing. And often this fear of failing stops us from doing things, from dating, from applying to a job. What happens if I don't get it? Well, what happens if you do get it? What happens if that's not the one, but what happens if that is the one? So this fear of failing really stops us from growing. And I was always afraid to fail because I was raised for perfection, to perfection, sorry. So I was so afraid to get something wrong, to disappoint, right? My parents. And as life evolved and I got older, I was afraid to fail different things. Like I was afraid to fail, like to look like I'm aging. Like this not wanting to fail is also about trying to be always in control. And trying to always be in control can really evoke anxiety. So all of these things are connected to one another. So when I joined Facebook, now I don't work for Facebook anymore, I work for TikTok. But when I joined Facebook, um, that sign, "fail harder," was incredible because it was my employer, and this is internally, the Facebook internal experience, right? As a employee, I'm not talking about the brand externally. So internally, the message that I got, even from my manager, was, fail harder. And when I made a big mess up, and I write about it in the book, my manager sent me a message: "Congratulations, your first and not less, and not your last failure." And I was like, what kind of workplace congratulates you for failing? but it's really important because you cannot grow and succeed and be the creative person you are if you don't accept the fact that you're going to fail. And the idea of fail harder to me means bring 100% of yourself. Try your best, right? Like even in a marriage, like when I got married, it was after my old boyfriend left me. So I knew it's very possible that someone will say to me, I don't like you anymore. You know, it really hurt me when he actually dumped me on the day I thought he was going to propose. So when I approached my marriage, I was like, oh my gosh, but what happens if it fails? But fail harder means that I'm bringing all of myself to my marriage life. And I do the same as a mother. And if I fail, at least I fail harder. I fail with trying my best, right? So it's a nuance, but it's a really important nuance. And I also think if we allow ourselves to fail harder, we become less obsessed about being perfect. And I understand, Tessa, how much pressure there is on, individuals like yourself. And I think that if we can all just be a bit kinder to ourselves, whatever you're doing for academic, for community, for Israel is incredible, and carry on doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. Um, yeah, and I think also coming from someone like you who's worked, in such big companies, it is kind of relieving to hear that a company like Facebook promotes this notion of failing harder in order to become more successful because, you grow by making mistakes. And I love the point that you make about that. And since I know that you worked for all these major social media companies in the world that focus on connecting people 24/7, I know that you didn't grow up religiously observant, and we kind of have a similar story in terms of that. So I'm curious if it was difficult for you when you began observing Shabbat, when society feels like it's demanding for us to be connected 24/7. So what have you learned from the art of, disconnecting once a week?
So I love that we're jumping between topics, and hopefully, people will be able to find something meaningful in, a few topics, and kind of, we'll create this kind of jigsaw, like puzzle together. So I grew up in a kind of North Tel Aviv home. We were very respectful of, our faith, or our, let's say, heritage. But as you said, we didn't really practice anything that has to do with it. And also when you live in Israel, you don't really need anyone to tell you it's Yom Kippur, right? It's a day of atonement. There's no cars, right? On Friday afternoon, you just feel the Shabbat vibes, right? There's no, so I do recognize that when you live in Israel, you're kind of culturally Jewish, and you get the education at school. But what I had no idea, completely no idea of, seriously, Tessa, that there is a spiritual element in Judaism. For me, Judaism was what you can and can't do. There was a lot of black and white, or what you wear, what you eat, where you can go out to, can you go to the beach on Shabbat or not? So at a relatively older age, I guess at the age of 38, I discovered that Judaism is a universal wisdom, that Judaism itself is a universal wisdom. And when I say universal, I mean that it's relevant for anyone, whatever they believe in or don't believe in, which is still believing in something, of course. Judaism has ideas to help you navigate life. So, with all due respect to Sigmund Freud, he did not come up with the ideas of anxiety and depression and jealousy. People have been feeling jealous and anxious for thousands of years. And there are answers for jealousy and depression and fear in the Holy Torah. So, question is, are we curious enough to look at that text and try to make it relevant for our life now? And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm reading and educating myself and trying to bring it to here and now, to myself, working in these companies, a mother of four, living a very busy life. And what I realized is that Shabbat is just an act. It's just the smartest thing ever. Like, how did God know? Well, of course he did, that in where we are now, we will desperately need like a detox of electricity. We will need some quiet space once a week to recharge, to not be wired to something, but just to be. And unfortunately, because of how we are as humans, we need boundaries and structures to encourage us to do certain things. So when I started experimenting with Shabbat, initially with myself and then with my husband and my children, I'm not gonna lie. One of my kids were like literally shaken for like a few hours because they needed to hold the iPad. But slowly, slowly, we realized that we're shaking less and we are looking more into each other's eyes and we're being. So I have no need to check my emails on Friday night. I am not interested in what's going on my Facebook on Shabbat in the morning. That will wait for me, Motzei Shabbat, when those 25 hours of chilling are over. And by the way, Tessa, I think that this idea of Shabbat, it doesn't have to be 25 hours. What about like for one evening, right? And it doesn't have to be only a religious thing. It needs to be, how can we help ourselves? As you say, we're under so much pressure, internal pressure, external pressure. How can we help ourselves navigate life and find a space when when we're only focusing on ourselves, and not comparing and not considering and not worrying? And I think Shabbat allows that to happen.
Yeah, and I wanna touch on the fact that you said, Judaism is universal, and I think that I mean, ever since I came to college, obviously, like you said, being in Israel and keeping Shabbat is more of a cakewalk, it's a little bit easier, and being on a college campus, it is a lot harder because you're surrounded by a secular environment, but I tell all my non-Jewish friends, this is something that could benefit you regardless of what your beliefs are, but just kind of unplugging from the world and kind of having the time to just spiritually reconnect, but also just like I feel like our phones distract us. We can't actually think about anything or, you know, come back to ourselves. So I definitely agree with you in that way. And I think Shabbat should be for everyone. I think it's very, very beneficial.
And Tessa, from how you and I chatted before, I think it's also the energy that we bring to anything that we do, right? If we bring an energy of like inclusivity, right? Where everyone can find a way to engage with this, right? So I invite as many people as I can to my Shabbat, table. Now with COVID, it was a bit harder, but it's about connecting. It's about building community. It's about sharing experiences, and it also should be inclusive. I really think that even though Judaism has elements of it which is by fault less inclusive, like kosher food, but the ideas in them, but no one is expected to, right? But the ideas within Judaism are about, finding the things that we share in common as humans, right? And that is love, and that is respect, and that is gratitude. And I also think that one of the things that I learned maybe the hard way is to surround myself with people that respect, that love each other, myself, and then can appreciate. And I was very lucky. My boss at Facebook, um, when I interviewed for Facebook, he asked me, actually, after I interviewed, he asked me on my first day at Facebook, I was like ready to take all the notes, all the things that I'm expected to do, because I was like, oh my gosh, accepted to Facebook, right? And and so my manager sat in front of me and he did not give me any instructions or any goals or anything. And he only asked me the question, first of all, how to pronounce my name. And someone called Michal really appreciates this because I've been Michael and Michelle and Michal and everything, which is okay because it's not easy to do the ch. I get it. So first of all, he really cared about pronouncing my name, which is already caring about my identity. And the second thing that he asked me was a very simple but so deep question, which was, what do you care about? He said, Michal, what do you care about? And I was sitting with him in the Facebook office in London. And I suddenly said, I care about being Jewish and Israeli and a mother. And in my many, many years in London, I never ever said those things. He was so caring about who I am that authentically answered. And then I really freaked out. I was like, why am I telling him I'm Jewish? Like, he's going to think I'm a woman of faith, but I am a woman of faith. And he's going to think that I'm Israel. Like, but I do care about Israel. And then he asked me, so, what does it mean to be Jewish? Now, I know it's different maybe in the US and, but for him, he had no idea what it meant. I told him about Shabbat. And every single Friday afternoon, he sent me a message for 5 years, Shabbat Shalom. And that was beautiful. So I've had really not great managers before, but once I spotted this caring manager, I gave that workplace and him everything I could, because he gave me everything he could, which is respecting and caring for me for who I am. So try to make career choices and any choices based on people that will make you feel comfortable in your skin.
Yeah. I mean, I hope that this is the future of every work environment, because I know that even for me, sometimes in classes, when there's an assignment due, for example, during Shabbat, it's always a conversation that needs to be had. And I almost feel like some people, you kind of have to convince them that it's okay for you to, be allowed to, observe. And kind of keeping along those lines of, company culture, many students that get involved with Israel and with Judaism on campus are afraid that it will hurt their future career prospects. And in the book, you share some deeply personal experiences about how there were times at different companies where you felt like you couldn't be yourself. And in one of those examples, you know that a bonus was withheld from you as a result. And once you conformed, you not only got the bonus, but you also were promoted. So, do you have any advice for students and professionals who are feeling like they need to conform and shed their Jewish or pro Israel identities in order to succeed?
So this is hard, right? This is hard. So in one of my workplaces in London, it was commented by my direct report, actually, a person that I was their manager. She said, "Oh, that's a Jewish nose," referring to my nose. I heard about it, but this is the first time I'm seeing one. You can imagine how that made me feel. Now, I was younger, and it was my first job in a certain industry. And the first thing I did, and I'm not saying that I'm proud of it, the first thing I did was covering my nose. And the second thing I did, I don't know if I actually shared it in the book. I asked my husband, I'm not proud of this, okay, but it's normal. The second, and I don't think I shared this in the book. I came back home and I asked my husband, Yair, do you think I should fix my nose? And it's a very, very painful experience. I don't know, I'm actually feeling a bit emotional about this now because I haven't thought about this for a while. So I was living away from Israel and already tried to adjust to different feedbacks that I got from recruitment agents in London. So I straightened my hair. I had ginger hair and curly hair, and they said that it's not a professional look in this country. So my Jewish curly hair wasn't accepted, and I straightened it because I wanted to fit in. I already had this weird name with a weird accent, and all of the organizations that I worked for, no one ever heard of, right? Banca Poalim, who can even say that? Which is a big bank in Israel. I think it's still on, like open. So, I just want to normalize the fact that we do want to blend in. We want to fit in. The question is like, how do you make sure that it doesn't cross lines? And I for sure allowed managers and people to cross the line, even either by like that comment about my nose. Obviously, that's pure anti-Semitism in my face. I also had anti-Israel comments. So that manager that you mentioned, when I was working for him, I was the only female manager, leader, woman on the floor, and I was talking, right, and I talk with my hands. And when I wasn't happy with something, I said, I think we should do something different. I was being myself. And then when I had the mid-year review, my first review, he said, listen, you're great, you're smart, you're la la la, but there's a problem with you. And the problem was that I speak with my hands and I express my emotions. And maybe it's a cultural thing, i.e., an Israeli thing. And it was very painful. And again, I'm not saying I'm proud of it. I sat on my hands for 6 months. I confirmed, don't know how to say that, confirmed for 6 months. And then I did get, as you said, my bonus and a promotion and all of that. Today, I would deal with it in a completely different way. And also today is a different world. But this is a very long answer for your very good question about it's okay if sometimes we feel that it's not fully, that it's not easy to be ourselves in different scenarios. But we also have to be very clear about what are our lines, and we shouldn't cross them, and we should protect ourselves, and we should be very, very clear about the things that we stand for and our values. The best way to do it is if you have a community around you. I was so alone. There was no Facebook to even message people. Have you had this experience as immigrants? So I think, try to be brave, but also thoughtful. Protect yourself. And if you're not ready to take this fight now, maybe it will be right at another day. And surround yourself with people that can help you feel really comfortable in your own skin. And that has to do with sexual orientation, with any sort of identity, but also fight against what's wrong.
Wow, that was I I think that the point that you made about sticking to your values is something that honestly has gotten me through as well. And I think, the title of your book, when I first read it, it kind of like caught me for a second and I had to think, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Weren't afraid of, having a boss that wouldn't accept you because of your Jewish identity or because of who you are and what you believe in. And I just kind of want to share this, but when I was living in Israel during, the attacks from Gaza, at the same time, I was fighting a battle on my campus against BDS. And I literally felt like I was living on two war fronts. And that was the first time in a long time where I truly felt afraid. I was like, I don't know if I can continue, speaking up online and standing up for what's right because I'm too afraid to continue. And then, when you said this about values, that's exactly what got me out of that mindset of despite the challenges that we face and, all these different factors that were coming in when I was going through that time, we should always stick to our values. And I was wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more on that because I think that that's something that you really, drove home in
And
your book.
and thank you. Actually, I should have said something about this before. So thank you for touching on this, Tessa. I think there is a difference between fear and anxiety. So I'm not going to go all academic on you, but in the context of what I'm trying to talk about in the book, there is a fear that is a life-saving, healthy fear, right? A survival fear, right? The fear that gave my grandmother the strength to jump off a train, right? Think about that. I was thinking about it as I was listening to Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichro Livracha, and his writing, and I was like, you know, what the Jewish people have been through, and the fear that they've been through around survival, um, and other nations as well. So there's a fear of like a lion is chasing you, so run, right? So, and I'm the last person to suggest any taking risk of life or safety or security. When I write in the book about what would you do if you weren't afraid, it's more around the fear of the fear. It's the anxiety of what if, right? What if I'm not successful enough? What if I'm not going to get an A star, A plus, whatever grade? What if I don't end up being the top 5% in my class? What if the campaign that I'm running, that fear of like, the concern that it's not going to be perfect or ideal, that's what causes a lot of anxiety and mental health challenges. And that's why I'm asking people, what would you do if you weren't afraid? If you took out that fear of not being good enough, what would you do? And would you be different? And, it's a big question. And it's not a question that you ask yourself like just one time in your life, right? So I don't want to suggest that anyone take unnecessary risk. But if you're recognizing in your life that you're avoiding doing things or thinking thoughts or being parts of yourself because you're afraid of what if, maybe it's a good idea to ask this question. What would you do if you weren't afraid? And the other side of that coin is the poster behind me, which is a quote from Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein challenges all of us. And he says, if you change nothing, nothing you will change. So once you discover that is in your way to being your full self, unless, as you said, unless you're taking action, unless you're doing something about it, it's not going to change. One of my almost biggest mistakes in my career is that I signed up to study law. And I did it because I thought my parents will really love me studying law. I didn't even ask them, by the way. And it was a couple of days, I think, before I started first degree in law. Um, I looked at all the books that I bought for the course, and I was like, I don't want to learn this. I don't want to study this. I loved watching Law and Order, the series. I love it. I don't want to read this content. So, so what would I do if I wasn't afraid to lose the tuition, to lose, a year of university, to go back to being a waitress? And often it's the ego that's in our way. I decided not to be afraid of my ego. I decided to change my mind, to lose a bit of money, to go back to serving, clients and tables. And then I found that profession that I love. So, not being afraid is often not comfortable, but most often it will take you to where you belong. And when you find where you belong, it could be a really sweet place.
Wow. I think that's honestly a beautiful note to kind of end off on, but if you have any, other like closing remarks, I welcome you to give them, but I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful message.
I just want to thank you and the ICC. And I know this is, part of a greater series, but, I just want to say that I'm supporting and empathetic to what, younger people or early career people are going through. And I just want to say that if it doesn't make sense yet, so you're not there yet. And it's just part of the journey. And the same thing I say to myself, I'm not there yet either. And that's good because that's a means that we have a long life of adventure and experiences. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Michal. Your book really inspired me and, kind of showed me how to continue using Jewish wisdom and all these different, topics that you touched on to find a life that's meaningful in both a personal and a professional way. And I really appreciate that you joined us today and shared your insights with us. And I know that I've personally just learned so much from you and from speaking with you. So thank you all for tuning in and for taking a part in this conversation. We will be following up with you and sharing information on the next Organizing Institute session and a link with you for you to request a copy of Michal's book. So please be on the lookout for that following session. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.